The pattern never announces itself when it begins. It doesn't arrive with panic or sirens or headlines written in red. It arrives quietly, almost politely, wearing the language of progress. Credit expands, asset prices rise, risk feels distant. The future appears manageable, even generous, and for a time, it is. This has happened before. It happened when silver from the New World flooded Europe and prices rose faster than wages. It happened when the Roman state replaced coinage with promises it could no longer keep. It happened when canals, railroads, and factories multiplied faster than the incomes meant to sustain them. Each time, the system appeared more sophisticated than anything that came before it. Each time, observers insisted the old rules no longer applied, but the pattern did not change. At first, growth accelerates beyond what underlying productivity can justify. Wealth seems to multiply without friction. Financial claims grow faster than the real economy beneath them. This feels like innovation. It feels like efficiency. It feels like mastery over old constraints. Yet beneath the surface, something fundamental begins to shift. Incentives change, discipline erodes, risk migrates from individuals to institutions, from institutions to the public, from the present into the future. Debt expands not because it must, but because it can. As long as confidence holds, the system appears stable. In fact, it appears stronger than ever. Complexity increases. Interdependence deepens. Fewer people understand how the machinery works, but more people rely on it completely. Success becomes measured not by resilience, but by scale. Not by sustainability, but by continuation. This is the most dangerous phase because nothing feels wrong yet. History shows that collapse does not begin with collapse. It begins with normalization. Extraordinary measures become routine. Temporary interventions become permanent tools. Warnings are not ignored, they are absorbed, reframed, and neutralized by narratives of control. Every prior failure is cited as evidence of future competence. Every near miss becomes proof that the system can be pushed further. And so it is pushed. Eventually, the system crosses a threshold that cannot be seen in real time. The cost of maintaining stability exceeds the value the system produces. From that moment on, the future is quietly mortgaged to preserve the present. Wealth continues to move, but it no longer accumulates where it's created. Productivity stalls while consumption remains elevated. The gap is filled with leverage, with promises, with faith. This stage can last years, sometimes decades. It feels permanent to those living inside it. Until it doesn't. When the break finally comes, it is not caused by a single event. The event is merely the excuse. The cause was embedded long before, when incentives broke and discipline gave way to comfort. The ending is never dramatic at first. It is administrative, procedural, rational. And by the time it becomes undeniable, it is already irreversible. Collapse, in reality, rarely looks like collapse. It does not arrive as a single moment, but as a sequence of adjustments that gradually strip a system of its flexibility. The public imagines collapse as something sudden and visible. History records it as something slow, technical, and initially invisible to those most affected by it. Large-scale systemic failure begins in the economic core, not at the edges. Politics reacts to it. Militaries are reshaped by it. Social order erodes because of it. But the initial fracture is almost always financial. When the mechanisms that allocate capital, price risk, and reward productivity begin to distort, the rest of the structure follows. The early stage is expansion beyond fundamentals. Credit grows faster than output. Financial assets appreciate faster than the productive capacity of the economy supporting them. This phase feels optimistic and self-reinforcing. Success appears widely distributed, even if it isn't. Disparities grow quietly, masked by rising nominal wealth and easy liquidity. Next comes dependency. Growth becomes increasingly reliant on continued expansion of credit rather than genuine increases in efficiency or output. Systems that once functioned independently become interconnected. Failure in one area now threatens the whole. This interdependence is celebrated as sophistication, but it also eliminates redundancy. Resilience is traded for speed. The third stage is distortion. Prices no longer reflect underlying value. Risk is mispriced because the consequences of failure have been softened or deferred. Incentives shift from long-term stewardship to short-term optimization. Participants are rewarded not for building durable value, but for extracting it. This is where discipline quietly erodes, not through malice, but through alignment. Doing the safe thing becomes indistinguishable from doing the reckless thing. Then comes saturation. Debt levels rise to the point where servicing past growth constrains future growth. Productivity gains slow, not because innovation has ended, but because returns are increasingly captured by financial structures rather than reinvested into the real economy. Consumption remains high, supported by leverage and confidence rather than income. The system still functions, but it no longer breathes. The fifth stage is intervention. Authorities step in to stabilize outcomes that markets can no longer resolve on their own. These measures are framed as temporary and necessary. Often they are. But each intervention sets a precedent. Each rescue reshapes expectations. Risk migrates again, this time away from markets entirely. Losses are socialized. Gains remain private. The system becomes asymmetric. Finally, rigidity sets in. The tools used to maintain stability lose effectiveness. Adjustments that once relieved pressure now create it. Small shocks produce outsized reactions. Confidence becomes fragile because it is no longer rooted in fundamentals, only in continuity. The system does not collapse because it is attacked. It collapses because it can no longer adapt. What makes this process so difficult to recognize is that each stage feels rational in isolation. No single decision appears catastrophic. Each is justified by context, by urgency, by precedent. Collapse is not the result of one bad choice, but of many reasonable ones made under distorted incentives over long periods of time. By the time the final stage arrives, there is no dramatic failure. There is only a loss of options. The system continues to operate, but only in narrower and narrower ways. Change becomes dangerous. Stability becomes artificial. And once flexibility is gone, the outcome is no longer a matter of debate, but of timing. The Roman Empire did not fall because it was weak. It fell because it became structurally misaligned with its own success. At its height, Rome commanded the most advanced economic system the world had yet seen. Its roads unified trade across continents. Its legal framework protected contracts. Its currency was trusted from Britain to the Levant. For centuries, Rome converted military dominance into economic surplus with extraordinary efficiency. Conquest expanded the tax base. Tribute flowed inward. Productivity rose as infrastructure spread. Wealth accumulated at the center and radiated outward through administration and commerce. This success created expectations. A vast standing army had to be paid. Urban populations had to be fed. Public works had to be maintained. The imperial system evolved from expansion-driven growth to maintenance-driven stability. That transition was manageable, until expansion stopped. Once Rome reached its natural borders, the surplus changed character. New territory no longer offset rising costs. Defense replaced conquest. Administration replaced innovation. The empire began consuming more than it produced, not in absolute terms, but relative to its obligations. To bridge the gap, Rome turned inward. Coinage was gradually debased. Silver content declined, first subtly, then aggressively. The state insisted the currency was unchanged, but prices told a different story. Inflation was not framed as inflation. It was described as scarcity, speculation, hoarding. The symptoms were blamed, not the structure. Confidence held because alternatives were limited. Rome still controlled trade. Rome still enforced law. Rome still appeared permanent. Debt expanded quietly. Future revenues were promised to meet present needs. Taxation intensified, particularly on productive classes. As incentives worsened, productivity declined. Small landholders were squeezed out, replaced by large estates optimized for extraction rather than resilience. Wealth flowed through the empire, but increasingly failed to circulate back into productive use. The social consequences followed predictably. Urban populations became dependent on state provision. Grain distributions expanded not as generosity, but as necessity. Economic participation narrowed. The distance between the governing elite and the productive base widened. Civic duty weakened as personal survival took precedence over long-term investment. Rome responded as late-stage systems often do, with control rather than reform. Price edicts attempted to freeze inflation. Professions were bound by law to prevent labor flight. Tax obligations became hereditary. These measures stabilized the appearance of order while hollowing out its foundation. Compliance replaced engagement. Fear replaced trust. Productivity continued to fall. Trade contracted. Regional economies fragmented as local actors lost faith in imperial stability. Wealth accumulated in fewer hands, often converted into land or hoarded resources rather than reinvested. The monetary system, once a strength, became a liability. Confidence eroded not because Rome collapsed, but because it could no longer convincingly promise continuity. By the time external pressures intensified, the internal system was already brittle. Invasions did not destroy Rome, they revealed it. The empire lacked the surplus, flexibility, and cohesion needed to absorb shocks. What had once been a dynamic, adaptive system had become rigid, extractive, and defensive. The final outcome was not a sudden disappearance, but a long unwinding. Institutions persisted without effectiveness. Titles remained without authority. Trade routes decayed without replacement. The wealth that once flowed effortlessly across the empire fragmented into local strongholds. Economic integration gave way to subsistence. Complexity collapsed into simplicity, not by choice, but by necessity. Rome's lesson is not that power fades, but that systems fail when success outpaces structure. When incentives reward preservation over productivity, when debt replaces growth, when monetary trust is spent rather than earned, decline becomes self-reinforcing. The empire did not run out of resources. It ran out of alignment. And once that alignment was lost, no amount of control could restore it. In the early 17th century, the Dutch Republic became the most financially sophisticated society on earth. It was small, resource-poor, and densely populated, yet it dominated global trade. Its ships moved goods between continents. Its merchants financed wars, monarchs, and empires. Amsterdam's financial markets set prices for the world. The Dutch system was admired because it seemed different. Power was decentralized. Institutions were modern. Capital flowed freely. Risk was dispersed through innovation. For the first time, markets appeared capable of self-regulation. Observers believed the old imperial cycle had been broken. For a time, they were right. The Dutch rose through productivity, not conquest. They invested relentlessly in shipbuilding, logistics, insurance, and finance. Their legal structures protected property and contracts. Their monetary discipline was legendary. The Bank of Amsterdam became a global anchor of trust, maintaining reserves and resisting debasement. Confidence in Dutch finance was so strong that capital flowed in from across Europe. Success, however, changed the incentives. As returns on trade normalized, capital shifted toward financial engineering. Wealth accumulated faster than productive opportunities. Lending became more attractive than enterprise. The Republic began exporting capital rather than reinvesting it domestically. Money moved through Amsterdam but increasingly found its final home elsewhere. Public debt expanded, not to fund growth, but to sustain status. The Dutch financed wars to protect trade routes rather than to expand productivity. These obligations were manageable at first, supported by credibility and low borrowing costs. Confidence compensated for fundamentals. Consumption patterns shifted. The elite lived extraordinarily well, supported by financial income detached from domestic production. Wages stagnated. Innovation slowed. The economy remained wealthy, but it was no longer dynamic. Productivity gains that once justified expansion gave way to rent extraction. The belief that this time is different hardened into doctrine. The Republic was too financially advanced to fail. Its institutions were too rational. Its markets were too liquid. Decline, it was assumed, belonged to less sophisticated systems. Then conditions changed. Rising competitors adopted Dutch methods without inheriting Dutch constraints. England borrowed the financial model and combined it with a larger population, deeper resource base, and centralized power. Returns on Dutch capital declined as opportunities shifted abroad. Meanwhile, the Republic's fixed obligations remained. When external shocks arrived, wars, trade disruptions, fiscal strain, the system proved less flexible than expected. The Bank of Amsterdam quietly abandoned full backing. Confidence eroded gradually, then suddenly. Capital flight accelerated. Financial dominance dissolved not through crisis, but through reallocation. The Dutch did not experience dramatic collapse. They experienced irrelevance. Wealth persisted, but influence faded. Markets remained orderly, but no longer central. The Republic became a rentier economy, living off past success rather than future growth. The pattern repeated cleanly. Early productivity, financial sophistication, capital export, debt accumulation, confidence outlasting fundamentals, then quiet displacement. What makes the Dutch case instructive is not failure, but denial. The system did not break spectacularly. It simply ceased to lead. The belief in exceptionalism delayed adjustment until adjustment no longer mattered. History did not punish the Dutch for ambition. It rendered their advantages obsolete, and it did so without warning. The modern global financial system did not emerge by accident. It is the product of deliberate design, shaped by the lessons of past collapses and the ambition to prevent their return. It is deeper, faster, more interconnected than any system before it. It spans borders, currencies, institutions, and technologies. And like every dominant system in history, it carries within it the same structural tensions that defined its predecessors. At its core, the modern system is built on confidence in continuity. Debt is not merely tolerated, it is essential. Governments borrow to smooth cycles. Corporations borrow to optimize returns. Households borrow to maintain living standards. Financial markets intermediate these obligations, slicing and distributing risk across layers so complex that no single actor fully sees the whole. This complexity is framed as resilience. In practice, it often obscures fragility. Productivity growth has slowed across advanced economies, even as financial assets have multiplied. The gap between claims on future output and the output itself has widened. This is not the result of malice or incompetence. It is the logical outcome of incentives that reward leverage over efficiency, scale over sustainability, and short-term performance over long-term durability. Monetary expansion has become the primary stabilizing mechanism. When growth falters, liquidity is supplied. When markets seize, backstops appear. Each intervention succeeds in its immediate goal. Crises are softened, recoveries are extended, but the side effects accumulate. Asset prices rise faster than wages. Risk-taking is normalized. The cost of capital detaches from underlying productivity. Debt, once a tool, becomes a condition. As obligations grow, the system becomes increasingly sensitive to disruption. Small changes in rates, confidence, or cash flow have outsized effects. Institutions respond rationally by prioritizing liquidity and continuity. Governments respond by extending guarantees. Markets respond by pricing in rescue. The feedback loop tightens. Wealth flows through the system at extraordinary speed, but it increasingly pools rather than circulates. Capital seeks safety, scale, and predictability. Productive investment competes with financial arbitrage and often loses. The economy continues to function, but its internal engine weakens. Growth persists, but it is thinner, more uneven, more dependent on conditions remaining just right. Confidence fills the gap. Narratives emphasize adaptability, innovation, and policy tools. Past crises are cited as evidence of mastery. The absence of collapse is taken as proof of permanence. As with Rome and the Dutch, success reframes risk as something already conquered. Yet incentives tell a quieter story. When returns depend more on financial positioning than productive contribution, when stability requires constant intervention, when future output is increasingly pre-committed to past promises, flexibility erodes. The system does not stop working. It becomes less able to change. What matters is not intention, but alignment. When the rewards for maintaining the system exceed the rewards for improving it, preservation replaces progress. This is the late stage every dominant financial order reaches, not because people fail, but because the structure succeeds too well at sustaining itself. History suggests that systems like this do not end because they are attacked. They end because they exhaust the conditions that made them adaptive. The modern system has not escaped that pattern. It has refined it. And refinement does not equal immunity. Late-stage systems always feel most stable just before they change rapidly. Volatility appears contained. Institutions appear coordinated. Risks appear managed. This is not illusion. It is the result of accumulated controls doing exactly what they were designed to do, suppress visible instability. By this stage, risk has not disappeared. It has been redistributed and deferred. Volatility is absorbed by balance sheets, regulations, guarantees, and expectations. Each shock is smoothed, each disruption addressed with tools refined over decades. The system grows accustomed to intervention. Participants internalize it. What once required caution now feels normal. Warnings still exist, but they are reframed. Signals that would once have triggered adjustment are interpreted as noise. Historical comparisons are dismissed as outdated. Models are recalibrated to recent conditions. The range of acceptable outcomes narrows, not because uncertainty has declined, but because deviation has become intolerable. Institutional denial rarely takes the form of ignorance. It takes the form of confidence. Decision-makers are not blind to risks. They are constrained by incentives. Acting early imposes visible costs. Waiting preserves stability until it doesn't. Careers, mandates, and political capital align around continuation. The system rewards those who maintain order, not those who disrupt it in anticipation of future strain. Narratives harden. Stability is attributed to skill rather than structure. Past rescues are treated as proof of permanent capacity. Risk normalization sets in. What would once have been extraordinary becomes background. Balance sheets expand. Commitments lengthen. Contingencies multiply. This is the acceleration phase, not because collapse has begun, but because adjustment has ended. Flexibility has been spent maintaining equilibrium. When conditions finally shift beyond what intervention can absorb, deterioration is no longer gradual. It is procedural, cascading through mechanisms designed for stability, not reversal. At that point, response becomes reaction. Options close quickly. Measures that once reassured now alarm. confidence, long sustained by continuity, recalibrates all at once. The system does not fail slowly anymore because it no longer has room to do so. Acceleration is not chaos. It is compression, and once it begins, it does not wait for consensus. History does not repeat because people fail to learn. It repeats because incentives outlast memory. Every system examined, imperial, commercial, financial, was built by intelligent actors responding rationally to the conditions in front of them. None set out to create fragility. None believed collapse was inevitable. Each made decisions that worked, until those same decisions slowly changed what working meant. Over time, the system rewards continuity more than renewal. Stability becomes a goal rather than a byproduct. The future is managed, smoothed, and negotiated away in small increments. No single step feels decisive. No single actor feels responsible. Yet the aggregate direction becomes unmistakable in hindsight. This is why collapse feels mysterious when it arrives. The causes are everywhere and nowhere at once. They are embedded in incentives, expectations, and structures that once produced prosperity. The same mechanisms that create order eventually limit adaptation. The same tools that suppress volatility accumulate pressure. The same confidence that sustains trust delays adjustment. Human behavior does not change across centuries because it does not need to. Systems evolve faster than instincts. Each generation inherits structures it did not design, responds to signals shaped by incentives it did not choose, and trusts continuity because continuity has always held until it hasn't. What history offers is not prophecy, but perspective. It shows that late-stage systems do not end because people panic, but because alignment erodes, productivity weakens, debt thickens, confidence compensates, and eventually the cost of maintaining the present exceeds the capacity of the future to pay for it. This is not a moral story. It is a structural one. The pattern does not care about ideology, technology, or intention. It only responds to incentives and limits. When those limits are reached, outcomes narrow. Not dramatically at first, quietly, administratively, then all at once. Understanding this does not grant control. It grants clarity. And clarity, while uncomfortable, is the one advantage history consistently offers to those willing to look directly at it. And if you're watching for the first time, welcome to the Economy Club. This is where we study the forces that shape history and the patterns that quietly decide the future. Stay curious, stay grounded, and we'll see you in the next cycle.